I sat there in this beautiful house thinking I had everything I wanted, and I just felt like a rich loser. Greetings, this is Carl, and you're listening to another episode of 50 Fires, a conversation about money and purpose. And today, my guest is Paul Ollinger. Paul is a nationally touring stand up comedian. He's the former VP of sales for Facebook and the host of the Crazy Money podcast. He's also the author of Reasonably Happy, a collection of funny and reflective essays about money, meaning, and the search for fulfillment. Paul is one of the only people I've met who can speak fluently about a Facebook IPO, student loan regret, and the psychology of wealth, and do it all while making you laugh. That line you heard, "I felt like a rich loser," is more than just a punchline. It's the kind of truth that this conversation with Paul is full of. We talk about what happens after the financial dream is checked off the list and how hard it is to fill the hole that leaves in its wake. So let's dive into my conversation with Paul Ollinger. Paul, what are we going to do? The first thing we got to cover is I'm so curious. We'll talk a little bit about it, but I'm so curious about comedy. And like, you're one of the very few people I've seen, like maybe the only person I've seen blend comedy and money as well as you do. How's that been?
Talking about money is really weird because it's, based on the premise of your show. It's similar to the premise of your show. It's like everybody's freaked out about it. Everybody thinks they don't have enough. Nobody defines themselves as rich. Rich is always other people because you only think about rich as somebody who has more than you do, not yourself. And so it's really weird. There's money inside of relationships is one of the number one things people fight about, and it's because money is pregnant with issues of power and priorities and family history and anxiety and all that stuff. It's really easy to talk about like at a conference. Like I spoke at an investing conference last week for a guy named Jared Dillion who writes an investing newsletter called the Daily Dirt Nap. And there were 100 private investors at his conference in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And it was fantastic because you can sit there and say, like, this was my journey. I made a lot of mistakes. I got to a point where at 42 years old, I had more money than I ever imagined having. And I walked away thinking that it was only about the money. And then I sat there by myself in my house and felt like a rich loser. And I started to feel not so rich because I started hanging out with a lot of people who had a lot more money than I was. And I was like, oh, those little airports that I drive by all the time, people actually have planes there. And then you start, well, why don't I have one?
Tell me about rich loser. Like that's a fascinating, pretty potent term.
When I quit my job at 40. I was at Facebook. I was a pretty early employee, and I walked away after 4.5 years after the traditional vesting period of stock options in Silicon Valley that are now, I think a lot of companies go 5 years now, or they have sort of like a back-loaded vesting schedule. And so they wanted me to move and I didn't want to move. And I was, there's a lot of office politics and my heart wasn't in it. I really wanted to be a stand-up comedian and pursue that, but my heart wasn't in it. And so I left the company and when you leave work initially, you wake up and you don't have sales quotas and you don't have people, your boss calling you in the middle of the night. You don't have a bunch of, stuff every day. It's like when you look at your phone, it's like I call this it's called the laptop test. Now it's called the phone test. But when you can kind of figure out how your life is going when you wake up and you look at your phone on the bedside table, and how you feel about that kind of indicates what your day is going to be like. Like if you're excited to see what's on the other side of that phone, you're a very fortunate person. And if you're not excited, you might be a fortunate person, but you're in a job that's not feeding your soul very well. Because if you dread opening your phone because you just know it's like, I'm going to pick that thing up and there's just going to be a bunch of problems in there, that's a tough way to make a living. But so when you walk away, and it's understandable that people walk away from jobs like that because they are very, very stressful. Um, Even though they take good care of their employees, you walk away, your first thing is, well, I'm gonna work out, I'm gonna travel, I'm gonna reconnect with some friends, I'm gonna write, I'm gonna take like a Spanish class, and you start doing all that stuff. And then 3 to 6 months in, you come home, and then you turn on your laptop, and there's nothing there. There's no email there. There's nobody looking for you, and you go, huh,
Hmm.
where do I fit?
Hmm.
And I've realized we went out to dinner with this couple. I don't know, it was a year and a half into doing nothing. We went out to dinner with this very attractive couple who were both doctors, and we were with my daughter and her friend from school. That's how we met them. And I was talking to the dad, and I knew he's a doctor, and I said, "What kind of medicine do you practice?" And he goes, very humbly, he was like, I'm a pediatric oncologist and a neurosurgeon, and I'm doing research down at the university to see if we can use nanofibers to slow the spread of cancer in the brains of infants. What do you do?"
So good.
And I'm like, "What do I do? I'm a loser. I'm not doing
Right.
anything. I was like, I blog some, but not every week. Who's got time for that, Like, and so, and
Right.
then in that moment, I kind of like zoomed out on my life, and I could see that like I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't up to anything, that I was just sort of treading
Mm,
water. And that wasn't a
mm,
positive feeling. And in the subtext of the question, what do you do, is, who are you?
mm. Yeah, yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. We moved to New Zealand for what was supposed to be a year and turned into 4. But about 6 months in, I noticed I kept asking, like I had a friend who would introduce me to people, and I would say, "Well, what do you do?" And after about 20 of those interactions, my friend said to me, like pulled me aside and said, "Mate, like, why do you ask that question? Like, we don't
Because
ask
I'm
that question."
American.
I know. He's like, "We don't ask that question. We ask, like, what did you do on the weekend? And where do you go with your family? And tell me about your kids. And which beach do you love? And what river have you been on?" And it was just interesting how much we swim in that water where, and I'm curious about any connection you've seen between, and specifically with your, right? So you've got an identity, you see it on the phone when you wake up, you're working really hard, and then that identity changed. Like your relationship between money and identity, and how we like shortcut into like, oh, that small airport, people have planes. Like, I'm a rich loser. This guy has a doctor. Like, what do you do? Like all of that stuff. There's some real stuff wrapped up there with like how we, at a fundamental level, how we see ourselves. What do you think about that?
Well, I started reading a lot, books to try to understand what was going on
Mm,
in my head. And because I had kind of fixated on financial success as the North Star for my life. Also, family and all that, but really, if you have two halves of your brain, one's family and one's work, and I'm not sure that's actually true, but you know what I mean. And the assumption always was, well, when I make money, I will feel as if I've arrived. I will feel like a person, and I will establish myself. This is where the reading led, is to understand that we're tribal mammals, and that there's a hierarchy that we have an instinct to want to be near the top of. And what's weird is the closer you are to the top, the further away you feel, because you realize, the shape of that curve in the top 99% gets real steep real fast.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And so, and I do think work for us is a shorthand, and I'm sure all other cultures have their own shorthands that are maybe better, but maybe not better. But work is a shorthand to say, where do you fit on that hierarchy? And people started saying, well, he made a bunch of money at Facebook and he retired. And I was like, I'm not retired. That's not who I am. That's not what I do. And so yeah, I think it has to do with the hierarchy, and um, some shorthand, some
Mm.
sociological shorthand.
Mm. How did you take me back to that moment where somebody says I'm using nanofibers to help kids, and they say, "What do you do?" Like,
Yeah.
how have you dealt with that sort of crisis of meaning? You know,
Well, it was a really valuable thing to happen, because and I can't emphasize how nice this couple was, and
sure.
but I just kind of saw this look of confusion in his eyes. He's like, "Well, I got to spend the next hour with this loser," like you don't know what you do, like you don't. And I think it was a wake up call for me to say, "Hey, man, pick a path. Like, you're not that old yet, but like, old time she is a flying, and." If you want to be a comedian or if you want to be a writer, get after it. Like be purposeful about that. And I don't mean that in a woo woo way of find your purpose. I mean, like, get after it. Wake up and start writing.
Mm.
And it was along those lines, or about that time along those lines, where I said, okay, I don't know. And long story was, we moved back from LA, where I was working at Facebook, to Atlanta, where I grew up,
Mm.
and where my parents were older and sick, and I was one of my five siblings, and I, who helped, take care of them. And that was an important experience to be a part of. But I wasn't really doing anything, and I was afraid to, I was hesitant to figure out how to start comedy back up in Atlanta, and because I'd done it out in LA before I went back to Facebook, but went back to work at Facebook, and at that point, around that time, I was like, okay, well, just start doing it. Do it poorly, do it sloppily,
Hmm.
but do it sincerely, and start doing it. And that's the only way to start is to start.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Paul, let's back up a little bit. We I realized I didn't ask you because I'm actually quite curious. What's your earliest memory of money?
It's a good question. It wouldn't be my earliest, but my family situation, as I mentioned, I'm one of six kids. My parents were completely devoted to their family, stayed together for 55 years until my mom died. My dad was an engineer at Georgia Power, so he always had a good job, but he was not. There wasn't a massive amount of luxuries. They chose to send us to all to Catholic school, which ate up a significant portion of their income. We had everything we ever needed, but it wasn't like we had, nice clothes, furniture, cars, all that kind of stuff. I remember when I was 12 years, and my parents were Depression era parents, like Depression mentality people. When I was 12, my dad took me to get a cavity filled. And right as I'm walking into the procedure room, he said, "Oh, by the way, don't get the Novocaine. It's $20."
I read this story and I was like, come on. So I was hoping you would bring that up.
Yeah,
Really?
so it's
How
it's
old
a
were you?
I
Can you
was like
remember?
12. I was like 12.
Did you
And my
even know what that meant? You were
no,
just like, oh
not,
yeah,
not
of
I
course,
did I
Dad,
did
I
about
want.
8 minutes later I found
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
So and I want to, you know, uh offer the caveat that, of course, we reconstruct these memories in our mind, right? But this
Sure.
definitely
Sure.
happened.
Yeah.
And the conclusion I've come to is, as I'm sitting there in that dental chair, and the dentist drill starts, tearing up my virgin molar, and the acrid stench of pulverized tooth fills the air, and I just started thinking to myself, someday I'm going to make some money, man, because money relieves pain, and literally
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is silly. This is silly that we can't spend $20 to avoid this kind of pain.
Do
And my
you
dad,
remember having that thought then?
I don't remember having that thought, but I
Okay.
remember
Right.
the experience. And
Right.
and there's lots of other ones where my parents were, the things they would always, the language they used, and who knows what kind of language I'm using around my kids, that's bending their minds in ways that I can't even imagine. But like it was always, we can't afford this, as opposed to we're not going to buy this because we don't think it's important. We have other things that we'd rather spend money on, that kind of thing. But so there was a bit of sort of that, scarcity mindset that established itself, and I sort of established the idea that, okay, I'm going to work hard to make good grades, because if I make good grades, I can get into a good college. If I get into a good college, I can get a good job and I'll make money, and then I will be happy because I will have enough.
And my pain will go away.
I suppose, yeah.
Or it will prevent some pain. Yeah.
Well, or then I'll avoid the financial stress that I see so
Sure.
much of, that I just think is like, I don't want
Yeah.
to be a part of my home in the
Yeah.
future.
Tell me, you mentioned just in passing, you said, we had everything we needed, but we didn't have, it's not like we had nice clothes or nice cars or anything. Did you know that? Like, when did you become aware?
Well, no, I think we sort of, we had, my dad, we had an older car, and there were 6 of us. We wore hand-me-downs, and I would certainly have done the same thing in their situation, if only from
Sure.
just a practical standpoint. But I do remember thinking, like, none of these clothes are my own, and some of them come up to about halfway down my little kid belly. They don't quite fit the way I'd like them to fit. But it wasn't.
Did you have an
like,
experience like in junior high or any of those, like where you
no,
remember like, oh, our car's old, or these
I think
clothes?
when I was younger, and again, nobody thinks about the kids who have even less than they do. They only feel a
Sure.
little bit socially awkward, and there was no deprivation, not one
Sure.
bit. And I don't want to
Sure.
I don't want to make it seem as if there was. It was just a matter of sort of like, and I'm guessing almost all our friends had similar experiences with their house.
Right.
And the rich kids, the people we thought were the rich kids were like the dentist's kids, right? They they were the or people who were just slightly more professional than my parents. And going back to Atlanta as a 42-year-old, I drive around the neighborhoods I thought were the rich neighborhoods, and they were probably 10% nicer than our place.
Fascinating, right?
Like just a little bit better, not materially different.
Can I I just want to investigate that just a little bit more, because I'm really curious, and I don't mean to be, to push on it, but the rich kids, like, is that with the benefit of hindsight, or do you remember knowing like that's one of the rich kids?
In high school, when we started going to school with different neighborhoods in Atlanta, there were neighborhoods that were more than 10% better.
And you knew it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you go, oh, these people have pools and pool houses and big yards and like way nicer cars and things like that.
Yeah.
And so there was a different level of money in that case. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting to think about that experience of just sort of being a little, I can remember actually going to one of my good friends' houses would have been early high school, so freshman or sophomore year, who had it might have been the first experience at like a friend's house that had a pool, up on a hill with a beautiful view, all of that stuff.
Where was
I
that?
just remember in Salt Lake, where I live, Salt Lake City, Utah.
Cool. Yeah.
And I just remember thinking like, this is different from my house, not, and I don't remember, same thing. We all have all these caveats. Like, there's no deprivation. Everything's fine. I have nothing I had to ski past a snowbird. Like, there's nothing.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but back then it was like $29, right?
Sure.
But nonetheless, I had one. So it's so interesting. And the 10% idea is really fascinating. And that doesn't change, that there's always somebody.
You want to know something even more different and not terribly flattering necessarily?
That's what I'm after.
You don't want to just hear wonderful things about me? When we moved back to Atlanta, we bought a house in the exact neighborhood that was the rich kids' houses when I grew up. And I don't think that's like a psychological coincidence.
Okay. Do you remember being like, yeah, I've arrived?
Yeah.
Like, was there any? Yeah.
Well, so we moved to New York City 9 months ago because we wanted an adventure for our family, including the opportunity to explore stand-up comedy here in town. But when I would drive up the driveway of our house, I would think, wow, this is awesome. And it really never I really never stopped feeling that way. I feel very, very lucky when I would come home. Not just because, I mean, and I was always happy to come home because I have a lovely wife and beautiful children too, but also just an amazing house. And it's like, I'm very fortunate. Um, so it wasn't like I didn't appreciate it, but I think also that when I kind of got to the level where I can afford to live where I want to live, I can belong to a country club, my kids can go to these private schools, and I can drive certain kinds of nice cars, I have enough. And I was like, I think that's enough.
We'll be right back with more from 50 Fires. Welcome back to 50 Fires. What, before you told that story, you used a word about, it was a, what did you say? Do you want to hear something?
Maybe psychologically insightful and not terribly flattering.
Maybe it was not terribly. Why? I'm curious about that. I mean, what other word could we use? Could we use the word embarrassing or something like that's because I'm wondering the same thing. Like I almost every day look outside, and especially when I get on my mountain bike and I don't have to put the bike on the car. I go out the back gate and I'm on the trails, and there's 400 miles of single track in the mountains around, and I just think I can't believe, especially from where I sort of came. Like I remember saying to myself, if I ever made, if we had 3 or 4 kids and I ever made X, and I've found that often numbers aren't helpful here because people
Sure,
over index on
totally.
them. But if I ever made X, I'll be set. And X is like 1/10 what you sort of need now. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I'm way beyond like to be here but is that something I should feel like? It's interesting that you use that word, something not terribly flattering.
Well, I think what's not
The
well. First
buying
of all,
the
I want to
house
say I
and
want to say that like that you're a lucky man that you can feel gratitude like that, on a daily basis,
mm,
because we're conditioned to habituate to it, to get used to it, right? And I mean,
yeah,
and reminding ourselves to be grateful is one of the keys to happiness, and the ability
yeah,
to feel joy and see, especially in nature, and maybe it's that specific place and access to those trails right there that you're talking about, but like the ability to look around you and go, wow, this is pretty good. That's a really valuable trait. What I think is,
and let me just add one caveat, and a privilege, like
yeah,
in meaning like I realize it's not nothing, that's for sure. Like
well,
it's a huge blessing to be not only in that spot, but then it takes active work to recognize it.
yeah, yeah, and that's good. Well, it's exercise for your brain, like this,
Yeah,
like the riding your
yeah,
bike is exercise for your body and your brain. But
yeah,
what I meant was not flattering, is that, or maybe more telling than not flattering, is
huh,
that
yeah,
the impressions that we create, or the beliefs we adopt when we're very young, inform who we are much later in life.
right,
And the
right.
metrics of success that we choose for ourselves are not random.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. What I was trying to push on is it's just so interesting how pervasive shame can be around our relationship with money. Shame or embarrassment or confusion. Does that make sense?
100%.
Yeah. What do you make of that?
Well, I think money is both, it's fetishized and stigmatized all at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah.
And so it's, oh gosh, I wish I remember the name of the book. Um, but it was all about the language we use around money, and how it's, dirty lucre and things like that,
Right,
where, you know,
right.
um, it was Jacob something, who was a professor in San Francisco. I wish I had that at my fingertips, but
Oh, Newman.
yeah,
Yeah. Newman or New. Yeah.
he talks about how we both worship it, and think about it as the root of all evil, when it is the love of money that is the root of all evil, not actually money itself that is the root of all evil. But we don't have, very few people have healthy relationships with money. Some people hoard it, some people get it and want to push it away as fast as possible.
Needleman.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great book.
Are you talking about Money and the Meaning of Life?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Deep. Really good. That's very fascinating. That it is something we both, if we're not careful about assumptions we've made, beliefs we've inherited, it is something we both deeply want and consider dirty at the same time.
It's like sex in that respect.
in that one respect, yes.
No, I'm
Yes,
serious.
it
I
is.
don't mean
Yeah.
that to be flippant at all. I mean, like,
No, I know.
we both want it and we're ashamed of it. No, Norm Macdonald had this old joke. He used to say, like, yeah, we're ashamed of sex. It's like, when you make a cherry pie for old lady Johnson on the street, you open your window sash and you put it out on the sill there for your neighbors to see. He's like, when it comes to sex, you pull the shades, you lock the doors. It's just like, we don't have a healthy relationship with either.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. That is a close corollary to, the things that we'd rather not talk about, and isn't fascinating. It's fascinating. They always do that little survey every year where, would you rather talk about the intimate details of your sex life or your financial position? And people choose intimate details of sex life over money.
Well, now with social media, they not only choose it, they proactively put it out there.
Right. What decisions have you made about money that don't make any sense to everybody else, but seem to be perfectly sensible to you?
The thing I struggle with, I think, at 56 years old with 2 kids who are in high school, is not knowing if I'm allowing myself to spend enough. Am I underinvesting in myself? Am I underinvesting in experiences for my wife and my family, travel and things like that? And am I causing myself undue stress about a topic where I could be both spending more and giving more away? And as I get closer to the end of life, and tricky part is it's not knowing when that's going to come, at least in terms of managing, your money. Maybe you have a little bit more clarity on how much you're going to need, but it still feels like, especially living in New York now, it is just expensive on a preposterous level. Like, do I have enough? When the stock market dips 20% in a couple of days, you go, whoa.
Yeah.
And you tend to sort of pull back even.
Yeah.
But so that's sort of me answering the question in a tangential way. If you want to give me another prompt about,
no, I'm actually
that's what
about
comes
that one.
That's what comes to
I
mind,
love that. Tell me, what are you doing about that? How are you solving that problem for yourself?
I'm trying to relax.
How's that going?
Well, it's going, look, I think it's going well. I kind of feel like I don't have another number where I'm like, I got to get to there. What I got very lucky to be a part of Facebook in the early days. And so I've been very fortunate to be able to finance my living my dream and working as a comedian and a writer. But there's no more money coming in right now, and so you're really reliant on the performance of your investments. And, after, we travel a pretty good bit, we take some nice trips and we travel in a way that is comfortable for us. And at the end of every year, I go, am I doing okay? Are I still in a good place financially? Yep. Did we take some nice trips? Yep. Were they more expensive than I thought they should be? Yep. Am I glad I went? Absolutely 100%. Am I glad I sent my kid to that camp? Yep. Why? Because it was 3 weeks they weren't on their phone and they're interacting with their peers in a one-on-one, real life, look them in the eye kind of way that is harder and harder for this generation to do. They were outside for 3 weeks.
Mm. And and you, like the rest of us, just sort of wish you could know the end now. Like, am I gonna
I don't know. Do I want to know the end?
the end from the beginning? Like, how's this all gonna work? Like, you know?
I think we all just want to know that we're going to be okay.
Yeah, totally. Am I gonna be okay? I wrote a column for the New York Times every week for 10 years, and I was like I'm a certified financial planner. I went back through and looked at the emails that I got, which was, thousands of emails. I never got asked for a financial plan, right? Like, but what I got asked all the time was, how am I doing, or am I going to be okay? Seems to be at the core of the question, because we just dislike. The problem, of course, is how do you possibly get that answer?
Well, I think you got to stay on top. You have to come at it from both a philosophical and a very practical, quantitative direction. You have to know what you want. You have to be clear about what you want your money to do for you. And then you got to watch the numbers that change and say, with what's happened this quarter, this month, this year, am I okay? And in a marriage, you're going to be much better off if you're on the same page with your partner and you're respecting his or her wishes in a practical way where you both feel valued and empowered, as opposed to one person being in our marriage, I'm the tight guy and she's the dreamer. And if you have two tight people, you'll never allow yourselves to use your money to do wonderful things. And if you have two dreamers, you're going to run out of cash.
Right. So in those moments when you get a little worried, because I am interested, we had Joel Stein, who's a really funny sort of writer, and he came on and he was all upset because he was like, I think there needs to be more numbers on this show. I mean, first he wanted to know like what number fire am I? And I was like 56. He's like, wait, there's more. And then I thought it was called 50 fires. And then the second thing he was like, I'm really disappointed in the show. He's like, I love the show, but I'm really disappointed because there's not enough numbers. And I was like, okay, great. Well, let's tell, like, how much money did you make last year? And he said 30,000. And I said, and how much did you spend? He said 200,000. And he said, and that's a problem. And so we got to talk a bit about that idea of like, lumpy incomes, and you're talking about a very lumpy income,
very lumpy,
like,
yeah,
very, very, very lumpy, like one lump,
like Oliver Twist oatmeal lumpy.
Exactly. It's just interesting when you deal with lumpy incomes, either extreme versions or less extreme versions, which I think more and more of us are. How do you deal with? Because I remember coming home and telling my wife, oh my gosh, and I'd be so grumpy about it. Like, we spent more money than we made this month. And after like 10 years of that, she finally was like, don't talk to me about a month. It's like, show me the year. And then some years I was like, we spent more. And then she's like, stop with the year. Show me 3 years. Like your income doesn't work in months. It works in years. But when you're in those moments where you're spending more and you do that, like you talked about that projection, the portfolio comes down 20%. It's very easy for us to take the recent past and project it into the future.
Right.
And say, man, it only takes like 4 more months like this and we'll have zero. What do you do to remind yourself hey, we're still going to go on the trip?
Yeah.
Right.
We were in the British Virgin Islands when COVID hit and the market, took a 20 or 25% dive. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I'll get a job. I'll go back to work. Like, I'm so lucky that all I got to do is go get a job and like turn things around in a pretty, like our fixed expenses are very low relative to, where we've been. And so if I got a job doing pretty well, I could cover our fixed expenses.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we bring down, like we would take one okay vacation instead of 2 or 3 very nice
Mm-hmm.
ones, that's
Mm-hmm.
easy to pull back.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fun to pull back, but it's easy to pull back. And I was like, I'm going to be okay because like my life is good even if we lost more than this. Um, with the most recent tariff dip in the market, what I did to soothe myself was look back at the market 6 months ago and say, look, we're basically just back to where we were 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't, and if you look at where we were in 2023, we're better than that. So like this is, and yeah, it could go down, but I try to think about things. Our wives are generally much smarter, emotionally intuitive about things like this. And so you got to look at it in the long run,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to look at it and say like, let's say this is a 10% dip that lasts through the year. You're still better than you were 2 or 3 years ago, and you're still doing fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're really worried about it, what are some things that you could trim back on that don't
Mm-hmm.
provide you as much joy as
Mm-hmm.
as other things?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that like that practical bit is really important. I've been getting this question a lot, like, what should I do? And I think that's that around the edges stuff. Like, are there things I can retain flexibility on? If I was thinking about getting a new car, can I wait? Like
Oh, totally.
anything I can push off, any subscriptions I can cancel. Like, just give yourself. I just think of it always as like giving yourself more margin for error, in case something goes on a little bit longer or something doesn't go the way you'd hoped. So
It's easy those, and sometimes those are good exercises regardless, because
right.
I wrote a piece not long ago about the streaming services.
I saw
I'm
that.
guessing most people have the experience that I have, especially if you share a household with a partner and a kid or four. Every month you're like, who's subscribed to this? What is
Right.
this? What is Acorn TV? I've never even
Yeah.
heard of it.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's your wife's British murder channel.
Right.
And I'm like, what? Why are we
Yeah.
paying $8 a month for this? And of course,
Yeah.
every month I'm like, are you watching this? It's fine if you're watching it.
I
Just tell me
did send the
just
exact
tell me
same
you're
email.
watching it.
Yeah. Send the
Because if you're
exact
not, we're
same.
going to cancel it. This is
Yeah.
$72 a year or whatever, $96 a year.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if you're getting value out of it, that's fine. I'm sure she just
Right.
drives me crazy. But we used to get one cable bill that had all your
Yeah.
everything in one
Yeah.
place, and so it was easy to keep track of. And now you don't even know. You get your credit card bill and you don't even know where you subscribe for this stuff, because you can subscribe for these streaming services channels on 47
Right.
different places.
Yeah.
So it's
Totally.
hard to keep track of. So you have to stay on top of that stuff if those are the things that are on the margin of your financial stress meter.
Yeah. For sure. I have the exact same email. It's almost a template now where I'm just like, hey, if you use it, great. Like the Adobe Creative Cloud, I'm excited for you. But if you don't, we'll cancel it.
Yeah.
Tell me, you've had a lot of conversations about money with people. What's the most outrageous or funny money story you've heard from somebody you've interviewed or met along the way?
Oh boy. I mean, I've talked to everybody from my then 81-year-old, now late father about money, and I've talked to adult film actress, um, and I've talked to some of these amazing academics. I spoke to Sir Angus Deaton, who is a Princeton economist, who is best known. He's a Nobel laureate, but he didn't win the Nobel Prize for this study that he did with Daniel Kahneman that concluded that there's no additional happiness after $75,000 a year in income. And that study there've been lots of caveats and disputes with that study, and subsequent studies that use different methodology that claim that there's no end to the happiness thing. But here's this 81-year-old, I think at the time, Scottish guy. He grew up. He told me stories about how his dad couldn't afford his version of my Novocaine story was that his dad couldn't afford like a 5-penny fishing license back in the 1940s or whatever, and so he couldn't afford to go fishing and actually catch fish that would have been worth way more than 5 cents for his family because they had a cash crunch. But at the end, this always happens too, as you'll probably appreciate this as a podcaster. After I turn the recorder off, he goes, "What'd you think of the new Dave Chappelle special?" And I was like, why do I always get this octogenarian wanting to talk to me about Dave Chappelle? And it's like, that's what we should be recording. That's the thing we should be talking about instead of your fancy Ivy League economics survey with Daniel Kahneman.
For sure. I have a little segment I want to do with you. We've only done this with one other guest.
Okay.
Where did my segment outrageous beliefs. I picked 3. They're not exactly outrageous, but 3 outrageous beliefs that Paul holds about money. And I just want to read you some stuff you've said, and you can tell me what you think about it. These aren't. I didn't
realize I was going to be held accountable for things I
know
wrote down.
You wrote once, and these aren't quite as outrageous as I wanted them to be. But I'm curious about this. FU money is a career detonator.
Yes,
having enough money to tell your boss to F off also means you're one spark away from blowing up your career or your marriage. Tell me about that. That's a slight counterintuitive take on this traditional idea.
Oh, I think when you get to a point where you feel like you have way more than you need, it is very likely, and it's very likely I had a similar experience to this, although I didn't quite utter the words, not specifically anyway, that you start to diminish in your mind the value of work. That you start to think, I don't need this job because I'm rich. All this BS is optional. Why do I have a job when I don't need money? And there's a lot of reasons we need jobs. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy, okay, and you can't have a podcast without mentioning Maslow's hierarchy. Everybody pull up your little mental PowerPoints and envision Maslow's triangle. And the first 2 layers are what? Safety and psychological needs. Money takes care of those, but you don't really give work credit for the belongingness and self-esteem layers that are on top of that until you quit and you find yourself feeling like a rich loser by yourself in your house, and you go, well, why don't I feel like I'm a part of anything? Because you ripped yourself out of that. That's why. Why am I not feeling the self-esteem I used to feel, even if you're not going to use those words? And it's because you're not working toward anything. It's because you haven't committed yourself to getting better or helping people solve problems or helping colleagues achieve their career goals or helping your clients solve problems, things like that. Work brings a whole lot of things to us that we don't give work credit for. And when you only think about work as a paycheck, there is a tendency to make decisions that don't fully value what you're getting at your job.
We need to talk a bit more about that just because it's really important. So forget the other outrageous things you've said. This is a common thing that happens to me because of the work I do and the place I live in Park City, Utah. There's a lot of people that come here for vacation.
I was there 2 months ago.
Yeah. So I often get this email that says, hey, I read the thing you wrote about envy or whatever, and I'm going to be in Park City. Can we meet for coffee? And I go to I have like one trail if it's the summer, and the coffee shop just closed, but I had a table I would always sit at because I was trying to embed either that trail or the coffee table with the emotional patina of these conversations because I knew what was going to happen next. And what always happens is, it's often a 45 to 55-year-old male, and they look around to make sure nobody's listening, and they show some evidence of winning, right? So it'll be an income statement or a balance sheet. I sold my business for a bunch of money, or I make a bunch of money, and then they'll look around again to make really sure no one's listening. And they'll say something really sad, like, is this all it was for?
Mm.
Or why, why am I? And I'm thinking of a specific guy that I just had this conversation with, runs a hedge fund based in Chicago, has a house here, kids divorce and kids gone, nobody talks to him, has this beautiful house. And he was telling me, like, I got it all. And I'm sitting by myself in this beautiful house. Let's just pretend for a minute. We've talked about how you can get there, but let's pretend for a minute you're there. What have you seen people do effectively to start rebuilding a sense of purpose or meaning?
I don't know of an experience where somebody has pulled themselves back from that brink. Not specific. I mean, I actually probably know several people that have had that brink.
Yeah.
Because I've
that
seen
story.
lots of...
Does that story sound outrageous to you, or are you
Not
having
at
a
all.
similar? Okay,
Not
good.
at
I just
all.
want to make, like, it seems like a pandemic to me.
There are plenty of very wealthy people I know who get divorced.
Yeah, and I don't mean
And
just divorce. I just mean the lack of meaning, loneliness,
100%,
wondering if there's okay,
100%.
good,
And
okay.
it's, I mean, Richard Corey went home last night and put a bullet through his head, right? Like, just because you're rich, and sometimes people get rich because they're chasing something or running away from something. That success and financial success. I've talked about this before. I remember when I was in ninth grade, I was very lonely my first year of high school. Even though I was surrounded by a bunch of friends, so I went to eighth grade, I just didn't feel like I belonged yet. And that turned around very quickly. But ninth grade was a very awkward time for me. And I remember the first time the Dean's List came out, I pretended like I had to go to the bathroom and left class and went and looked where the Dean's List was posted. And I saw my name on it. And I was like, I'm okay because I'm on that list. And I think that I have used progress and success, titles, diplomas, financial outcomes to self-soothe, to say, I'm doing okay. In a world where we don't feel, that can sometimes feel unstable. Even if you've got a stable family that you come from and a stable family that you've created, sometimes you look at these things, these exogenous indicators of success to say, I must be doing okay. Look at all this.
Look, right.
So, but I think what happens is when you sit down and you get there and you go, and so this was maybe a blessing that I kind of had this point where I felt like a rich loser. It's you have to choose other ways to evaluate yourself, because at a certain point, the external stuff doesn't reward you. And the only way to continue that external stimulation is by more.
Right.
But at a certain point you get there and you're like, okay, I got everything, man.
Right. There will never, if that's your measuring stick, there will never be enough.
Whose yacht is longer is, the game being played at the very high end of the, the 1% of the 0.00001%. So yeah, that story, like, I've got it all. Why don't I feel it? And at a certain point, you have to decide what you want to stand for and what you want to work on. And maybe the hedge fund guy, easy to make fun of hedge fund guys because the success is so disproportionately large. But the hedge fund guy who's gotten everything but still doesn't feel. And by the way, all those hedge fund guys, every quarter, every year,
right,
their worth is their number, not
right.
how much they have in total, but what'd you do this year? And so it's a constant pressure that never stops. And even when that does stop, you're going to have to replace that with something that you feel is worth doing for the intrinsic rewards, not the extrinsic rewards. And it's hard to do because you have to shift. It's still hard for me to do 12 years later. You have to shift this focus from like, well, am I the most successful comedian out there? Nope. Am I better than I was last year? Probably. Am I proud of what I've written in the last year? Yeah. And that happens on a daily or on a weekly basis. You just have to keep putting
Mm,
pen to paper. You have to keep
mm,
showing up at crappy open mics when you move to New York City because nobody knows who you are here. Um, Even though you've headlined around the country, speaking purely hypothetically, of course. And so
mm.
you have to you have to be like, the metrics I'm using are inside here, not out there.
Okay, you're still in, because I can go look and see the number of views, subscribers on YouTube. I can see how many uh ratings you have on Apple Podcasts. I like how you I happen to know from 12 years ago, 14 years ago, that Amazon I don't know how I would know this, but Amazon updates your book ranking every hour. I happen to know that because I
Right.
think for the first 36 hours, there wasn't an hour that I missed when the first book came out.
And did that
How do
make you
you
happier checking? It's like checking your
no,
stocks
it was
every
terrible. Like, it
hour.
was the worst thing ever. Like, looking back on it, and I've got a new book coming out in October, and I'm just committed to not repeating. But how do you deal? So there is still some external measurement thing that's very easy. Like, you're doing public work. How do you deal? I asked Peter Schuckman this, because here he's like Zen master, right? And he releases a book. And I'm like, Peter, how do you deal with that hand wavy? How many subscribers do you have? How many copies did you sell? How many reviews do you have on Amazon? So, Paul, how do you deal with that? Because it's no longer necessarily straight to money, but you do have still,
It's a necessary evil.
there's
And
no way for you to avoid it.
and if you want to make it, quote, make it, whatever that means, as an entertainer or as a creator of anything, you have to build a platform. And
Right.
so, you know, you can resent social media, but it's the only game in town.
Yeah.
And so I'm starting to think about it as, how do I create something on that? I'm trying to think about it as a blank slate, as a canvas, and it's up to me to create on. And I haven't figured it out yet. I
Mm.
do love Substack has been the place where I can create and feel authentically me.
Hmm.
I don't
Nice.
feel like, when I make a video on Instagram, 6 out of 10 times I feel like I'm faking it here a little
Mm.
bit. I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying too hard, which is
Mm.
partially generational, but it's also like, yeah, you're trying a little too hard. Whereas on Substack, when I'm writing, I'm like, I like the puzzle of writing. I like the mental exercise of writing. The essays that you've referred to, you know, I try to make the reader laugh. I try to make the reader think, and I try to learn something that I didn't know before I started writing with every article about myself and about the world. And that's the beauty of writing. And I worry, you know, I'm using AI to write, and it's so helpful that I worry about what the craft of writing is going to look like
Mm.
10
Mm-hmm.
years from now, not 2 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a ton to unpack with that. Let me ask you a couple just as we wrap up here. If someone found a complete record of your financial transactions, what would they know about you?
What would they know about me?
What would they find out about what you valued?
Oh my goodness. They would find out that I like wine.
Mm-hmm.
They would find out that I like nice experiences with
Hmm.
my family. I think those would be, yeah, and we like to do fun stuff.
What would you be embarrassed that they would find out?
Um, well, I think that this is where the relative nature of money comes in. You know, I spend I spend in 3 months what my parents made in a year.
Mm.
Not even some, maybe, on my credit card. I'm not talking about my mortgage and my kids' tuition and stuff like that. Now, granted, time value, maybe it's 4 months, whatever, but like, we
Right.
spend a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And relative to what we have, it's not dangerous or reckless. But we bought my mom a Dooney and Burke purse, when she was 65 or something like that. And she was like embarrassed by it.
Mm-hmm.
And she took it back.
Mm-hmm.
Because we wanted to buy something nice for my mom, and she was
Mm-hmm.
like, this is way too much. And I don't even think Dooney and Burke, it's like a upper middle brand, it's like a Nordstrom, mid-level Nordstrom kind of thing, which we were like, Mom, you deserve nice things, and she just wouldn't have it. And so I think there's a little bit of like, do I deserve to spend like this? Even though it's not financially reckless.
That's such a good question. Like, what do you? How do you wrestle with that question?
I wrote a whole article about the concept of deserving things.
Deserving,
and you remember in what's the Clint Eastwood movie?
Untouchables,
Unforgiven.
Unforgiven.
He's sitting there with a shotgun, or maybe it's a rifle, pointed at William Money's at who just died, Gene Hackman's death, and Gene Hackman says, I don't deserve this, to die like this. And Clint Eastwood says, deserves got nothing to do with it.
So good.
Deserve is a concept that is not helpful.
Isn't that fascinating how loaded so much of the language we use around money is?
Yeah, and deserve, think about deserve. It's like, do you deserve to does this kid deserve to get into Princeton as opposed to that kid? I don't know. Does Pete Davidson deserve to date the women that he gets to date? No. No. Then again, somebody gets cancer. Do they deserve it?
Right. So much.
So this language that the language we use around, like, my feeling is that so much of life is random. That, did I deserve to be born to two parents who loved me with 4 limbs that work and a brain that's, has allowed me to function pretty well into adulthood? I didn't do anything to earn that. Did I deserve it? Well, it's sometimes we act like we do. Probably most of the time. Do I deserve to spend the money? It's probably the wrong question.
Yeah, very unuseful. What's one thing that still scares you about money?
How little some people have of it. And it's not so much that. It's how few people respect money.
Tell me more.
Both at the high end and at the low end of the economic scale. And there's different reasons for that. Like, I feel like, even as tight as I am, I feel like I respect money. And my wish for everyone is economic autonomy. I wish that for all people, all races, all genders. And I wish the language we used in our society was about, how can we make people more powerful in their life, as opposed to feeling more like victims and perpetuating a victim mindset. And I think that when I went from being broke, the richest I've ever felt is the day I paid off my student loans, my graduate school loans. I had a net worth of $0, and I felt very, very powerful. And I wish people could could internalize that, feel that experience of taking control of your life and believing that before you brush your teeth in the morning, you don't have to be stressing about your finances.
Yeah, it's so good. So, Paul, as we wrap up here, I'm curious. Let's pretend like I'm doing this show still in 20 years. and I have your daughter right now is 14. So I have your 34-year-old. Your
Oh my God.
34-year-old. I know exactly. Your 34-year-old daughter on as a guest. What would you hope? What would you hope she would say she learned from you about money?
I would hope, whether she got it from me or not, that she felt in control of
Hmm.
her financial life.
Hmm.
And if she got any money from mom and dad,
Hmm.
that it helped her feel like a stronger, more confident person who can live a life in service of herself and in service of others, however she chooses to define that.
Hmm. Amen, Paul. Thanks for having this conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Cheers. There was this moment in this conversation that I keep reflecting on where Paul says, "The richest I ever felt was the day I paid off my student loans. I had a net worth of 0 and it felt powerful." It's interesting to me that that was obviously not about the size of the net worth or the number, because the number was 0. It was about the feeling of control, confidence, freedom, and clarity. That really was the thread that ran through this episode. What this conversation with Paul continually reminded me of was that the real reward isn't money, it's autonomy, it's freedom. It's knowing that you can live a life in service of yourself, others, and the things that matter to you, however you define that. Paul, thank you for your honesty, and thank all of you for listening to another episode of 50 Fires. Cheers, my friends.
The views, information, or opinions expressed in the series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Chip and Joanna Gaines, Binel Audio, nor Magnolia.